When my husband died, I thought grief would be my greatest enemy. But I was wrong. My son, the boy I once nursed through fevers, the man I believed would honor his father's memory, looked me straight in the eye, smirked, and said, "Don't expect a penny from Dad's $55 million estate." He thought I was powerless, too old, too broken to fight back. He thought betrayal could bury me. But what he didn't know was that I held the one piece of truth that would bury him instead. And by the time he discovered it, it was already far too late. My name is Margaret Caldwell, and I am 80 years old. My hands shake sometimes when I pour tea, my knees ache when I climb the stairs, but don't mistake that for weakness. Age doesn't strip you of wisdom, it sharpens it. And it gives you patience, the kind of patience that turns pain into something far more dangerous, resolve. For 54 years, I stood beside my husband, Thomas. Together we built everything from nothing. He was a visionary in property development, clever with numbers, bold with investments. But behind every deal, every piece of paper, every signature, was me. I kept the books balanced. I managed the details he hated. I understood the fine print when others only saw dollar signs. We weren't just partners in life, we were partners in empire. When he died, my world split in two. His absence hollowed the house. His chair at the head of the dining table sat empty like a wound. At night, I reached across the bed and found only cold sheets. I thought my son, Daniel, would be my comfort, my strength. After all, he was our only child. But grief does strange things to people. Or perhaps, grief only unmasks what was always there. 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral, Daniel came to the house. He didn't bring flowers, or a meal, or even a hug. No, he arrived in a designer suit, with polished shoes and a grin that never reached his eyes. He walked into Thomas's study, the room that had been my husband's sanctuary, and dropped a stack of legal papers on the desk. "Mother," he said, his voice oily with false kindness, "we need to settle the estate. I know it's a lot for you to handle, so I'll take care of everything. Dad left $55 million. It's enough for me to manage. You'll be fine with, well, whatever's arranged for you." I blinked, stunned. "Whatever's arranged for me?" Daniel smirked. "Don't expect a penny, Mother. Dad's estate is mine now. That's what he wanted. You should just rest. Enjoy the little things." The words stung more than I can describe. Not because of the money, I had more than enough to live comfortably, but because of the cruelty. My own son, sneering at me in the home his father and I had built, dismissing me as though I were a burden. I wanted to scream, to slap him across the face, to remind him of the nights I stayed awake rocking him when he was sick, of the years I sacrificed so he could attend the best schools, of the empire his father and I had built not for ourselves, but for him. But instead, I swallowed my fury. Because I knew something Daniel didn't. Thomas and I had spoken often about Daniel's arrogance, his reckless spending, his obsession with luxury. We had worried. And Thomas, being the man he was, had prepared. What Daniel didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that the estate wasn't as simple as a stack of papers on a mahogany desk. That night, when Daniel left, I went into the library. My fingers trembled as I turned the combination on the wall safe. Inside were documents Thomas and I had drafted together over the years. Not just wills and trusts, but hidden protections, accounts Daniel knew nothing about, and letters, one of them sealed, addressed to me. I sat by the firelight and opened it. Thomas's handwriting was steady, comforting. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I am gone. Daniel may try to claim everything, but remember, appearances deceive. Not everything is where he thinks it is. Protect yourself. Protect what we built. Use what I left for you, and if betrayal comes, you know what to do." I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Even in death, Thomas had thought of me. And though my heart broke at Daniel's betrayal, something inside me hardened. The next morning, Daniel returned with lawyers. Slick young men with expensive suits and practiced smiles. They spoke quickly, shuffling papers in front of me, explaining that it was all routine. They wanted me to sign away control. I sat quietly, listening, nodding, my hands folded in my lap. I looked every bit the grieving, fragile widow. But inside, a storm raged. When they finished, I smiled faintly. "Gentlemen," I said, "I appreciate your time. But I won't be signing anything today." Daniel's smile cracked. Mother, don't be difficult. This is for the best. I met his gaze, calm and unwavering. No, Daniel. This is for you. Not for me. And I think your father would disagree. His jaw tightened. He gathered the papers in a huff, muttering under his breath, and stormed out. But as he left, I caught something in his expression, not just anger but fear. That was when I knew he wasn't as confident as he pretended. He was desperate. And desperate men make mistakes. That night, I sat by the fire, Thomas's letter in my lap. My grief was still there, heavy as ever. But now it had a companion, resolve. Daniel thought he could erase me, push me aside, take everything we built. But he didn't know the whole truth. He didn't know the safeguards his father left. And he certainly didn't know that the widow he dismissed as too old still had fight left in her veins. What he would discover soon enough, what he could never imagine, was that his downfall had already begun. When you raise a child, you believe your love will shape them. You tell yourself the lessons you whispered, the sacrifices you made, will take root. But standing in the ruins of my husband's absence, I realized something bitter. Sometimes greed drowns out love. The morning after Daniel stormed out of my home, I sat in the library with Thomas's letter spread before me. The words echoed in my mind, appearances deceive. Not everything is where he thinks it is. It was more than comfort. It was a message, a hint that Thomas had left me a path. I began by retracing Thomas's routines. My husband was a creature of habit, disciplined to the last. Every Friday evening, he poured himself a whiskey and reviewed the company accounts. Every Sunday morning, he walked the property lines of our estate. And every December, without fail, he reviewed the trust documents with our attorney. So I called the man I trusted most, Henry Blake, our family's longtime lawyer. He was in his early 60s now, with silver hair and a steady voice that never wavered. He had known Daniel since he was a boy, and he knew my husband's mind almost as well as I did. Margaret, he said softly over the phone, I'm sorry for your loss. Thomas was more than a client. He was a friend. I swallowed back tears. Henry, I need to see everything. The trust, the estate, the protections. Thomas left me a letter. He knew Daniel would do this. Henry sighed, and in that sound I heard truth. I'll meet you tomorrow morning. Bring the letter. When I arrived at his office the next day, he greeted me with warmth, then closed the blinds and locked the door. Daniel has already contacted me, he admitted. He wanted me to expedite the estate transfer. He was insistent. Pushy. But Margaret, he opened a thick file on his desk. Thomas was careful. The estate isn't Daniel's to control, not yet. My breath caught. Explain. Henry leaned forward. The majority of the $55 million is in a trust. You are the primary beneficiary. You hold veto power. Without your signature, Daniel cannot touch it. What Thomas left Daniel is conditional. Very conditional. I clutched the arms of my chair. Conditional on what? Henry's eyes narrowed. On conduct. If Daniel engages in fraud, reckless spending, or actions that threaten the company's stability, his inheritance can be revoked. Permanently. I let those words sink in, tasting them like a fine wine. Revoked. Permanently. My son's arrogance had blinded him. He thought I was powerless, but in truth, I held the dagger above his head. All I needed was proof. Henry, I said, my voice steady, what happens if I can prove he's already guilty of those things? Henry didn't hesitate. Then the trust bypasses him entirely. It reverts to you. That night, I returned home with a fire in my chest. Daniel's downfall would not be loud and brash. It would be precise, deliberate. And to dismantle him, I first needed to know what he was hiding. It didn't take long. Within a week, rumors began to trickle in. A call from one of Thomas's old associates. A note slipped to me by a former secretary. Even a quiet word from a banker we'd worked with for decades. They all told the same story. Daniel was reckless. He had been draining company funds to finance his lifestyle, luxury cars, gambling trips, extravagant gifts for women who disappeared as quickly as they arrived. One night, while sorting through Thomas's old desk drawers, I found something else, a key card to a storage unit. Thomas had always been private about his records, but I had never known about this one. The next morning, I drove across town and found the unit tucked in the back of a quiet facility. Inside were boxes, dozens of them, filled with ledgers, contracts, backup drives. And there, in Thomas's handwriting, was a folder marked simply, Daniel. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents Thomas had collected, evidence of Daniel's debts, accounts of reckless withdrawals, even surveillance reports. My husband had known all along. He had been watching, documenting, preparing. I sank to my knees in that storage unit, clutching the folder to my chest. I could almost hear Thomas's voice, "If betrayal comes, you know what to do." When I confronted Daniel days later, I did not reveal what I had. Not yet. He came swaggering into my house again, this time with Vanessa on his arm, his new wife, barely 30, draped in diamonds and perfume that filled the room before she even spoke. She smiled sweetly at me. "Margaret, darling, you look so quaint. Daniel tells me you're being difficult about the estate. That's not wise, you know." My jaw tightened. Difficult, or careful? Daniel sneered. "Mother, stop this act. The estate is mine. Sign the papers, and I'll make sure you're comfortable. Refuse and," he leaned closer, his voice dropping, "you'll regret it." I looked into his eyes and saw not a son, but a predator. A man who had already betrayed me once and was ready to do it again. But I smiled faintly, concealing the storm inside. "Be careful, Daniel. Some games end before they begin." He laughed, dismissing me, and left with his glittering wife. But as their car pulled away, I felt the weight of Thomas's folder heavy in my desk upstairs. I had proof. More than enough. But timing is everything. The world doesn't reward the first strike, it rewards the last. And so, I waited. I began moving quietly, shifting assets Thomas had hidden, securing the documents, making copies in case Daniel tried to seize anything by force. I met with Henry again, this time bringing him select pieces of evidence. His eyebrows rose as he skimmed through the pages. "This is damning," he whispered. "If this goes to court, Daniel will be destroyed." "Not yet," I said softly. "Let him believe he's winning. Let him hang himself with his own rope." And that's exactly what I did. I let Daniel dig deeper, watched as he borrowed against company accounts, took out loans he couldn't cover, and flaunted wealth that wasn't his. I stayed silent, patient, even as he mocked me to my face, parading Vanessa like a prize. Because I knew what he didn't. Every move he made, every dollar he stole, every threat he whispered, I was documenting it all. And when the time came, when the stage was set, I would not just take back what was mine. I would take everything he thought defined him. His money. His power. His pride. But that wasn't the most dangerous secret I uncovered. No, that came one evening, when I overheard a conversation between Daniel and Vanessa that revealed something far darker than greed. Something that made my blood run cold. And that secret would change everything. There are betrayals that sting like a slap, and then there are betrayals that feel like a knife twisting in your chest. I thought my son's sneer, the words "don't expect a penny," was the cruelest cut I could endure. But I hadn't yet heard the darkest truth, the one that would make me realize Daniel wasn't just greedy. He was dangerous. It was a late evening when I uncovered it. I had grown used to the emptiness of the house since Thomas's passing, but that night the silence felt different, heavy, expectant. Daniel and Vanessa had insisted on hosting a dinner at his penthouse to discuss matters. Against my better judgment, I agreed to go. Sometimes, when you're setting a trap, you need to walk straight into the lion's den. The penthouse glittered with excess, marble counters, gold fixtures, bottles of champagne stacked like trophies. Vanessa swept into the room in a crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination, her diamonds catching the light. Daniel kissed her cheek in front of me, a performance more than affection, then turned to me with that smug smile I had come to despise. "Mother," he said smoothly, "it's time you accepted reality. The estate is mine. If you resist, you'll only make things harder on yourself. Vanessa and I want to move forward. We don't need obstacles." I sipped my wine, silent. His arrogance filled the room like smoke. But arrogance makes men careless. Later that evening, after Vanessa excused herself to take a call, I rose to find the bathroom. Their hallway was long, lined with mirrors and dim lights. As I passed a partially open door, Voices drifted out. I froze. Daniel's voice was sharp, desperate. It's not enough, Vanessa. We need more. The bank's pressing me, the investors are circling. If Mother doesn't hand it over soon. Vanessa cut him off, her tone venomous. Then maybe she shouldn't be around much longer. My blood ran cold. Daniel hissed back, don't say that. Why not? Vanessa sneered. She's old. She's fragile. An accident, a slip, and the money's ours. Do you really want to spend years groveling for her scraps while we drown in debt? The silence that followed was worse than the words. My son didn't protest again. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, don't you dare speak about my mother that way. No, he said nothing. I pressed my hand against the wall, my breath shallow. For a moment, grief swallowed me whole. The boy I had nursed through fevers, the man I had believed would protect me, was gone. In his place stood someone who would quietly let me die if it meant wealth. But then grief hardened into something else, steel. I slipped back into the dining room before they noticed I was gone, sat down, and finished my wine. Neither of them suspected I had heard. They laughed, they toasted, they pretended. But I had seen behind the mask. That night, back in my quiet home, I opened Thomas's folder again. His words echoed, if betrayal comes, you know what to do. Yes, I did. The next morning, I began tightening the noose. First, I went to Henry, our lawyer, and told him everything. He didn't blink, didn't even look surprised. Instead, he pushed a folder across his desk. Margaret, I've been compiling evidence for years. Thomas asked me to. We have more than enough to prove fraud, embezzlement, and reckless mismanagement. If we file this in court, Daniel won't just lose his inheritance. He could face criminal charges. I stared at the folder, then looked up at Henry. Not yet. Let him think he's winning. Let him think I'm weak. The blow must come when he least expects it. Henry nodded. Then we'll wait. But Margaret, his voice softened. This path is ruthless. Once you take it, there's no going back. I straightened my back, every inch of me calm. He made that choice when he betrayed me. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in patience. Daniel grew bolder, pressing me with more lawyers, more demands. Vanessa called, her voice dripping with false sweetness, urging me to let go and enjoy retirement. I smiled, nodded, and agreed to think about it. Meanwhile, I documented everything, every reckless purchase, every loan default, every whisper of gambling debt. And slowly, the mask slipped. At a family dinner one Sunday, Daniel snapped in front of others, slamming his hand on the table when I refused to discuss estate matters. His voice cracked as he shouted, "You're old, Mother. You don't know what you're doing. This money is mine." The silence that followed was deafening. Relatives exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, Daniel looked less like a confident heir and more like a desperate man unraveling. I remained calm, folding my napkin neatly. "Careful, Daniel. People are watching." He stormed out, dragging Vanessa behind him, but the damage was done. Rumors began to spread. Whispers of his instability, his greed. I let them spread. Sometimes the best revenge is not what you say, but what you let others believe. But I wasn't finished. Not even close. Late one evening, I visited the storage unit again. I sifted through Thomas's records, looking for the final piece of the puzzle. And there, tucked inside a sealed envelope, I found it, proof of a hidden account. Tens of millions, protected under my name, shielded from Daniel's reach. My hands shook as I read the documents. Thomas had not only anticipated Daniel's betrayal, he had ensured I would have the means to fight back. For a moment, I wept. Not from sorrow, but from gratitude. My husband had trusted me to finish what he began. When I finally returned home, I placed the documents in my safe. And as I locked it, I whispered into the silence, "Soon, Daniel. Very soon." Because what Daniel and Vanessa didn't know was that their every step was now walking them closer to ruin. And the next move, the one that would turn suspicion into certainty, was already falling into place. A banker, one of Thomas's old allies, called me the next morning. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said carefully, "you should know. Daniel just tried to access restricted funds using a forged signature. Yours. My blood ran cold, then hot. Forgery. Fraud. A crime so blatant, it was as if he had placed the rope around his own neck. I thanked the banker, hung up the phone, and sat in silence for a long time. My son had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And now, I would not just defend myself. I would destroy him. But I wasn't ready to strike yet. No, I wanted him to feel safe, to believe he was winning. I wanted him to walk into the trap with his head held high, never realizing the ground beneath him was about to give way. Because the most satisfying revenge is not swift. It is patient. And my patience was just beginning to pay off. Revenge, I realized, was not just about striking back. It was about striking at the right time, in the right way, when your enemy had convinced themselves they were safe. And Daniel, my son, was too arrogant, too reckless, to realize the storm waiting above his head. After the banker confirmed Daniel had forged my signature, I didn't run to the police. Not yet. Instead, I copied the documents, filed them neatly, and tucked them into my safe. I wanted more. I wanted Daniel to expose himself so completely that when the world finally saw the truth, there would be no sympathy left for him. I began planting seeds. Quiet conversations with family friends. Subtle comments at dinners. A raised eyebrow when Daniel bragged too loudly about his inheritance. Soon whispers grew, was he really fit to run the estate? Was Margaret truly as powerless as he claimed? Daniel noticed, of course. He grew angrier, more desperate. But instead of softening, he doubled down. He began flaunting his wealth even more brazenly, new cars, new jewelry for Vanessa, lavish parties that cost hundreds of thousands. He wanted the world to see him as untouchable. And I let him. One evening, I attended one of those parties. Vanessa had insisted I come, though her smile was all teeth when she greeted me at the door. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, champagne flowed, and music echoed off marble walls. Guests in sequin gowns and tailored tuxedos danced, laughed, and whispered. Daniel spotted me across the room. He strode over, his arm draped around Vanessa, his grin smug. "Mother," he said loudly enough for half the guests to hear, "so glad you came. Perhaps now you'll finally see what true success looks like." I smiled faintly. "Is that what this is, Daniel? Success? Or is it desperation dressed up in diamonds?" The laughter nearby faltered. Daniel's grin stiffened, his eyes flashing. But before he could respond, Vanessa tugged his arm and whispered something in his ear. He forced a laugh, patted my hand condescendingly, and walked away. But I saw it. The crack. The flicker of fear. Later that night, I slipped away from the party and into his study. My husband's training had made me meticulous. I knew where to look. Sure enough, tucked behind a drawer, I found what I suspected: ledgers, loan statements, overdue notices. Daniel's empire was a house of cards. One stiff breeze, and it would collapse. I photographed everything, my hands steady, my heart pounding. Then I returned to the party, sipped a glass of champagne, and watched my son dance like a king who didn't realize his crown was already slipping. The next morning, I called Henry, our lawyer, and laid out the evidence. His face grew grim as he flipped through the photographs and forged documents. "Margaret, this is enough to bury him. Forgery, fraud, embezzlement, he won't just lose the estate. He could go to prison." I sat back calm. "Not yet. I want him to walk into the courtroom himself. I want him to believe he's winning until the very last moment." Henry studied me for a long time, then nodded. "Very well. But when the time comes, you'll need to be ready. Once this is unleashed, there's no undoing it." "I've been ready since the day he sneered at me," I said softly. The weeks that followed were a performance. Daniel pressed me harder than ever, demanding I sign papers, sending more lawyers to harass me. Vanessa even tried her hand again, calling me with syrup in her voice. "Margaret, darling," she crooned, "don't you want peace? Don't you want to rest, to stop all this fighting? Let Daniel handle things. He knows what's best." I almost laughed. "My dear, the last thing Daniel knows is what's best." Then I hung up. Behind the scenes, I prepared. I gathered witnesses: the banker who caught Daniel forging my signature, employees who had seen funds vanish, vendors still unpaid from his lavish parties. Quietly, I made sure they were ready to testify. But still, I held back. I wanted one last push, one last act of arrogance from Daniel that would make his downfall not just legal but public. And he delivered it. One Sunday, he arrived at my home unannounced. He didn't knock, he stormed in, Vanessa trailing behind him, her face tight with irritation. "Enough, mother," he snapped, slamming papers onto the dining table. "Sign these. Today. I won't ask again." I glanced at the papers, more transfer forms, more attempts to seize control. I pushed them back toward him. "No." His face twisted with rage. "Do you think you can stop me? I've already moved things forward. With or without you, this estate is mine." Vanessa chimed in, her voice sharp. "Why drag this out, Margaret? You're old, you're alone. What good is all this money to you? Let us enjoy it before it's too late." I stared at her, then at Daniel. And for the first time, I let the steel in my voice cut through. "You've already lost, Daniel. You just don't know it yet." His face went pale, but he covered it quickly with a sneer. "We'll see about that." Then he gathered his papers and stormed out. As their car roared down the driveway, I stood at the window, Thomas's letter in my hand. "If betrayal comes, you know what to do." And I knew. The trap was ready. The stage was set. All that was left was for Daniel to take his final step into the abyss, a step he was already preparing to take. Because what I hadn't told him, what I hadn't told anyone, was that I had uncovered something even more damning than forgery, something that would not just strip him of money, but of freedom. And soon, the entire world would know. There is a certain satisfaction in patience. To sit silently while your enemy digs his own grave, brick by brick, shovelful by shovelful. Daniel thought he was building an empire. In truth, he was digging deeper into ruin with every reckless move. By the time spring arrived, I had everything I needed. Forgery. Fraud. Evidence of debts that could drown a man twice his size. Witnesses who would gladly speak against him. And yet, I waited. Because revenge is sweetest when the world is watching. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Daniel announced a grand family gathering at his penthouse. He claimed it was to honor his father's memory, but I knew better. It was a show, one final display of wealth and dominance. He wanted to stand in front of friends, family, investors, and prove he was king. I accepted the invitation without hesitation. The evening glittered with excess. Waiters carried trays of champagne and caviar. A string quartet played softly in the corner. Vanessa floated across the room in a gold gown that sparkled under the chandeliers, her smile wide and hungry. Daniel strutted from group to group, shaking hands, boasting about his inheritance, promising deals that didn't exist. When he saw me, he raised his glass. "Mother. So glad you could make it. Everyone, let's toast to the Caldwell legacy." The crowd cheered. Glasses clinked. And in that moment, I knew it was time. I set down my glass, lifted my chin, and let my voice cut through the room. A toast, indeed. But perhaps the truth should be part of it. The music faltered. Conversations stilled. Daniel froze, his grin faltering. "Truth," he said, his tone strained. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "For months, you've paraded yourself as heir. You've told the world the estate belongs to you. But what you didn't tell them is that you forged signatures. You drained company funds. You borrowed against assets that were never yours. You didn't inherit an empire, Daniel. You built a house of cards." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's face went pale. Daniel laughed nervously. "Mother, she's confused. Ignore her." But I raised a folder in my hand. "These are bank statements, loan defaults, and copies of forged documents. Witnesses are ready to testify. You thought you could erase me. Instead, you've erased yourself." The silence was deafening. Then whispers began, sharp, cutting, relentless. Guests exchanged shocked glances. Investors who had come to hear Daniel's grand promises looked furious. Vanessa hissed, grabbing his arm. "Daniel, do something." But there was nothing he could do. His mask was gone, ripped away in front of everyone who mattered. I turned to leave, but not before saying, "Your father trusted me to protect this legacy. And protect it I shall. The trust is mine now, Daniel. You will never touch a dime. I walked out, my heels clicking against marble, the sound echoing like a gavel. Behind me, the party dissolved into chaos. Voices rose, arguments broke out, and for the first time, Daniel wasn't the man in control. The next morning, Henry filed the documents in court. Forgery, fraud, mismanagement, the case was airtight. Within days, injunctions froze Daniel's accounts. His cars, his penthouse, his jewelry, all tied up in legal battles. He called me, his voice ragged with fury. How could you do this to your own son? I listened calmly, then replied, You did this to yourself, Daniel. I simply let the world see it. Then I hung up. But even as I sat back, sipping my tea in the quiet of my home, I knew this wasn't the end. Because I hadn't revealed everything yet. Not the darkest secret, not the final card Thomas had left me in that sealed envelope. No, that was for the end. For the moment when Daniel believed things couldn't get worse, when he still clung to the scraps of his pride. And when that moment came, I would strike the final blow. Because money was one thing. Reputation was another. But the last secret I held, the one Daniel and Vanessa thought was buried forever, would destroy them completely. And I was patient enough to wait. People often believe revenge ends when the enemy falls. But real revenge, the kind that settles deep into your bones, ends only when the betrayer is forced to live with the weight of their own ruin. Daniel thought he had already hit bottom when I exposed his fraud in front of family, investors, and friends. His accounts frozen, his penthouse on the market, his so-called empire crumbling. He had become a pariah overnight, the whispers following him everywhere. And Vanessa, ever the opportunist, began to unravel beside him. I heard she screamed at him daily, that she threatened to leave, that the diamond-crusted life she had dreamed of was slipping through her fingers. But I wasn't finished. No, the time had come for the final card Thomas had left me. The secret neither of them knew I held. I pulled the sealed envelope from my safe one quiet evening. My hands didn't shake this time. I opened it, unfolded the papers, and read every line. And as I read, a slow, steady smile spread across my face. It wasn't just money Thomas had safeguarded. He had left behind evidence. Evidence of transactions Daniel had tried to bury years ago. Fraudulent transfers. Shell accounts tied to gambling rings. Even correspondence between Daniel and certain partners, who had since been investigated for money laundering. It was worse than I had imagined. And then there was the letter. Thomas's words, clear as day, if Daniel betrays you, give this to the authorities. He will not just lose the estate. He will lose his freedom. Protect yourself, Margaret. And protect what we built. I slept soundly that night. The next morning, I went to Henry with the envelope. His eyes widened as he read. This will finish him. Margaret, if we give this to the district attorney, Daniel could face years in prison. I nodded. Good. Let him have time to reflect. He sneered that I wouldn't see a penny. Let him see nothing but iron bars. It didn't take long. The DA moved swiftly. Subpoenas were issued, investigators raided Daniel's office, seizing computers, boxes of files. Vanessa was caught in the storm too, her name on loan applications, her signature on joint accounts. The call came a week later. Daniel's voice was frantic, broken. Mother, please. You can't do this. I'm your son. I made mistakes, but I'm still your blood. I closed my eyes, listening to the boy I once cradled, the boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knees. Then I remembered his sneer, his words, don't expect a penny. I remembered Vanessa's hiss, maybe she shouldn't be around much longer. You stopped being my son, I said quietly, the moment you plotted against me. And Thomas knew it long before I did. He begged, he cursed, he wept. And then the line went dead. The trial was swift. The evidence was overwhelming. Forgery, embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy, count after count stacked against him. Vanessa tried to shift the blame, but the law doesn't care for crocodile tears. She was charged too. I sat in the back of the courtroom, dressed in black, my pearl necklace at my throat, my hair pinned neatly. When the judge read the sentence, prison for Daniel, fines and probation for Vanessa, I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I simply sat tall, my hands folded, and let the weight of justice settle over me. Afterward, people asked me if I felt guilty. If watching my only son led away in handcuffs broke me, it didn't. What broke me was the betrayal. What healed me was the revenge. I went home that night, poured myself a brandy, and sat in Thomas's old armchair. The fire glowed, warm against my face. For the first time since his death, I felt him there with me, not as a shadow, but as a steady presence. We had built an empire together. And I had protected it, just as he asked. Daniel had sneered that I wouldn't see a penny. But I had seen it all, the empire, the downfall, the justice. And now, I had peace. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the silence. They thought I was powerless. They thought age made me weak. But in the end, it wasn't their betrayal that defined me. It was my revenge. And for the first time in months, I slept without a single nightmare.